Hi, I'm Richard Hilson. I work at VET Services in Waipukerau, and we've also farmed here at Takapau. We've got about 300 hinds, 50-60 velvet stags and 800 ewes. From an animal health perspective, we don't drench any adult stock, we only drench the weaners. The weaners are vaccinated against Yersinia, but other than that we just try to feed them. Pay attention to their social structure. Try not to have mobs side by side, but we make use of crops like we'll show you shortly, hopefully, some plantain and kale to keep things well fed and keep them healthy. So a bit more focus on a good animal than the use of a lot of products. I think from a best practice point of view, I think a lot of it actually based on keeping animals in good condition, and at the end of the day mostly that's about feeding and avoiding stress. So if you, unfortunately, when we run out of feed because we've got a drought or we were overstocked, then we get stress and we get more disease, we get more opportunity for parasites to get stuck in. But best practice is partly avoiding that and partly risk mitigation. I'd like to think our deer are well fed, they perform well, but I know year on year we get Yersinia in our weaners, so best practice for us is to vaccinate. We've got clients who don't get Yersinia in their fawns, so there's an informed risk, an informed decision to take that risk that might happen and not vaccinate. So I think every farm's different. Drenching, for parasites is best practices. It's a difficult one to answer right now. I think the deer industry needs to do a bit of catch up on what really is best practice. But certainly I'd expect most people would be drenching their weaners all through the autumn and the winter and into their first spring. If animals are fed well, after that they should have a fair degree of immunity and not have to do anything else. Like I've said, we don't drench our adult stock at all. Animals that don't really perform in a mob will end up culling, because at the end of the day, if they can't handle that, I don't want to keep their genetics. They're better gone. So they don't necessarily have to be propped up. I think a lot of best practice is identifying what you should do and what you could do. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money on animal health with deer, but if you've had lepto in deer, you might not want it again. Most people aren't vaccinating for lepto, but you might not want it, so you'll just do it anyway. But deer are great. I mean, they've only been domesticated for, depends whose deer you're talking about, but sort of 50 to 100 years, and they've still got there's still an innate sort of survival instinct that possibly is lacking to a degree in sheep and cattle because they're domesticated for eons, and we've got an opportunity with deer to farm them in a sort of sustainable, semi-organic manner, just about. But just covering a few risks off and just a little bit of sensible management without chucking heaps of work at them. There's plantain here, and this here, this clover's come naturally. We planted it just straight plantain, but it was actually planted at the start of the drought, and it really didn't enjoy it. The paddock was beautifully green, but it was actually the weeds. It was nightshade in particular, and but after the drought, when the nightshade died, we had a pretty good crop, but we did have a strip through here where it didn't strike as well. But there's 5 hectares here, and we'll use that for use of lamb on it in the spring, and then we'll have hinds and fawns on it with through the summer, off and on, and weaners over the autumn, and it gets locked up for lambing late, sort of midwinter onwards. So it's quite a good mixture. It just has got a bit of weed in this paddock. We haven't done it perfectly, and we have got the plantain moth coming. None here to show you now, it's got too cold, but pretty damn obvious when it's here. You can walk through the paddock and it's just a wave of moths coming off in front of you, so we'll see how it goes. But we've got 3 paddocks of plantain and I'm really happy with it. This is something that's worked out really, really well for us, and probably no South Islander would be surprised about it, but winter feeding hinds in the winter. We've put in sort of 4 to 5 hectares of kale every spring. It's going to feed 250 mixed age hinds for, well, this one will only do about 75 days. Measured it a few weeks ago, and it's about just over a 10-tonne crop. Doesn't probably look as good here, but it's certainly grown since the rain came in April. We'll break feed it, weekly breaks, a little bit of baleage for the hinds, and they get pretty much, it's more or less ad lib, that when brake shift, there's always some stalk left. They're starting they're really happy. If it's particularly cold or particularly wet, we'll give them some baleage, but if we have a dry week, they eat less, they'll get no baleage. Worked out really well, because one of the things, certainly from a best practice point of view, or not actually best practice, but from a practical perspective, it essentially frees up the rest of the farm for the weaners and the velvet stags, and they've got a heap of space in the winter. Ideally, the hinds will come off this in early September, and the grass is growing flat out by then. So we try to we graze towards the creeks or the wet areas. If there's a real wet area in the paddock, we'll fence it right off, because it won't have been planted anyway. We've got the electric fences running 10 to 11,000 volts, 4 hot wires, and we've had no problems holding them in. So it's pretty effective. It's a real nice way, budget the feeding, we know what we're going to feed them, we know how many we're going to feed them for how long. It sort of dumbs down your winter, don't have to think about it too hard. You know you can get through, you know what you might have to do to if you have to chuck some more feed in the system somewhere else, but I do know that all the adult stock are on here and they'll be happy. So it's a really positive wintering system. But from a best practice perspective, something we should have done with this crop was actually soil test it before we planted it. We came out of the drought, we had plantain in here at grass scrub age, at drought and overgrazing dealt with the plantain, so we put moata in for a winter feed, absolutely brilliantly. We locked it up and cut it for baleage at the end, and then we went straight into the kale after spraying. And I think what we missed was that we needed a whole lot of potash. On the far side of the paddock there's a place where we trim the eucalypts. There's a great big bonfire, and it's grown an outstanding crop of kale, but unfortunately only in the area probably about 20 by 10. And I made a mental note that I'm never going to do that again. We'll soil test every time we plant a crop, and we'll get it dead right. And this crop is about 10.5 tonne measured. The last 4 years we've had from 10 to up to 17 tonne crops. And to be fair, kale, it's not hard to establish, it's not hard to grow. But if you're going to invest the money on the seed and the preparation, and we have to use contractors, we don't do it ourselves. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it properly. Just chuck a little bit more money at it, and make a good crop into a great crop.